an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire Shadow Book 3 of Killers and Kings, chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12. In these chapters, I wasn't prepared for the fact that Lucan did tell Shera everything. She doesn't think about it as often as I would expect. I can't tell if that's appropriate or not. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Asher for commissioning this episode. So yeah, I was saying last time I wish you had told her, and apparently he did tell her. But my issue is the fact that Shera, this hasn't been on her mind really at all. And this is the thing that you start to get into very ticklish territory. When you are writing from a perspective and that character knows information and the reader can't know it yet. And so you have the character not think about it. Is that valid? And a lot of people are going to give you different answers, especially based on the way it's handled in the text, based on what the character is like, and based on, like, in general, if the text is really stylized, sometimes it works better because it feels like you're not being given all the information anyway. Best example that I can come up with is Gone Girl, where you have this entire section of the book from the husband's perspective who is accused of murder, and he never once thinks to himself whether or not he committed the murder, which feels really strange. And personally, I have no issue with it because I think that book otherwise is like, it's trying to do something very specific and I don't care. But other readers really thought that was ridiculous. And I get what they mean. I'm not saying it's not a problem, but for me, it worked because it's not really a murder mystery, really. So it didn't matter. In this, Shera having this information and not thinking about it, and it being sort of dialed under, for lack of a better way of saying this, it feels like she absorbed it when they talked about it, and then she put it away. I think does feel kind of in character. Shera is such a practical person, and not thinking about information that is not immediately relevant, I feel like works. Her whole thing is when she talks to Lucan that they need to wake up the Regents, which is really interesting because I was saying how I didn't know what triggered them being here now. And honestly, the idea that they would just wake them never occurred to me. I think I thought, and this may be true, we don't know how it goes yet, they may not actually wake them and the Regents come back for other reasons. But assuming they do wake them, I have been assuming there's like a restriction to that you can only wake them in a certain, like, you know, basically there's going to be magic that has to be sort of penetrated before you can get to them. And I don't know if there is a, you know, magical code phrase or will, or I don't know. But the idea that they could go down there and just wake them up never entered my head because I have been assuming that there's like a dedicated person or situation for that. And that it's baked into whatever enchantments. This is not the wording that's used in these books, so it feels weird to say that. But the intent, I guess, of these sarcophagi that they're sleeping in is to preserve and protect. And I don't know if there is something baked into that about And if XYZ happens, this is going to shake like there's an earthquake, and there's going to be like an alarm going off, like you're waking up at 6 a.m. to go to work kind of thing. So anyway, this is surprising, and I feel like I'm willing to overlook it. I feel like it does work with her character. It's a little bit weird that she hasn't been thinking about it, but not to a degree that really bothers me. And there may be more information later explaining why it's not exactly on her mind anymore. So I just wanted to address that out of the gate because, you know, forgive me, guys. I was under the impression that Jorun Cursebreaker was around in the second book. I have been, and he is, right? Like, is he around in the first book? I'm trying to remember. I know that he's referenced in the first book because he helped build a ton of the Grey Island. So I remember that he's brought up, but I couldn't, the timing of everything, in other words, because this does jump back and forth in time so much, I am trying to remember if we actually saw Jorun awake in any of the flashbacks or anything in the first book. I can't remember. Doesn't really matter. I'm just sort of curious because I lose track after a little while. So let's go into chapter 9. And it starts off with the Magisters Guild, a little like excerpt talking about the difference between soulbound vessels and how some soulbound can actually hear voices and others can't, and find that others are sort of treating their vessel as if it is a sentient being. They find that really weird. And what is being asserted here is that vessels suited for combat have disproportionately strong wills. I submit that a history of violence affects the awakening process in volatile, perhaps even disturbing ways. Which, I just think that makes sense. Like, if we're talking about intent and the sort of energy of the user being absorbed by an object, and that is a very real thing in this universe, the concept in the real world of ghosts, especially ghosts being around because of a particularly violent act being performed on the premises of whatever, you know, building or battlefield or whatever, that in a world where we don't really believe in something akin to intent, even we are like, oh, well, it makes sense that a murder victim would hang around and bang on the walls because they got murdered. Like, that's a fucked up thing, and their soul is unsteady now. And I feel like that only makes sense if it's a weapon that's being used to do the killing. You have got a crazy mishmash of the intent of the person who is going to do the killing, and it has to be an intent of somebody who's okay with that. And then the intent of a person who is fighting for their lives also being kind of absorbed as well. And then the overall effect of a death, I mean, I'm talking with the first two, the person trying to kill and the one defending themselves, the actual death doesn't even factor in, and already that's a lot of intent happening. And then, if they succeed in actually taking that person's life, that has to do something bonkers. So, that makes total sense to me. And I feel like finding out that maybe this isn't the way that all soulbound vessels work helps me, because I always have been running into in this series not really having a good idea how normal certain things are versus others, and how, you know, like even the thing with the readers and Lucan being particularly good, as it turns out. And I knew that he was considered good, but I just didn't really get, we don't see people doing that transforming of materials or anything like that in the way that Lucan does a couple of times. It doesn't come up that often. Like Calder, when he fights as a reader, doesn't use that sort of defense or offense most of the time. So I don't have a good idea of the way things are allegedly supposed to work and the way that whatever we're experiencing with our characters is different. And to a degree, I'm okay with that because it makes the world feel more real in a sense that there isn't a very carefully delineated series of cause and effects and this is what they can do and can't. The world doesn't tend to be easy to compartmentalize like that. So the fact that the magic here doesn't work along those lines, apparently, I find pretty believable. But I do sometimes feel a bit lost in this because it isn't outlined as firmly. And so there can be something that's dropped and it's supposed to make a big impression on me. And I am not quite aware that this is that big a deal. Or, so I'm just trying to say that I feel a little wonky occasionally and like I don't have my footing under me. And George in the chat, he says, also, I'm glad you mentioned the timeline being weird in your head. Every time I read this series on book 3, everything gets so mushy because you know almost all of the 2 timelines and 2 stories. I just have a hard time keeping track of all of it. Yeah. So that brings me to the other thing that I was actually going to mention, George. So I appreciate you bringing that up too. I am not feeling this method of storytelling at this point. I think bouncing back and forth in time works in the first book. I think that it could even stay working in the second book. I think we are in the third book and it is time to stop. It is like focus and be straightforward because there are too many players and there is too much going on to keep it straight with just what's happening in the present and the number of people involved and the number of potential outcomes involved, to also add in having to keep track of when a thing has occurred. And it's not just, oh, that was a flashback. That was a flashback 10 years ago. That was a flashback 6 years ago. That was a flashback 3 years ago. That was a flashback 6 months earlier. There are so many levels of flashback that it becomes impossible. So I think that it was a little bit of a mistake. And I get that he's setting it all up, that we're going to be getting important information in the final book that somebody had discovered way earlier. And so it's like, I can understand feeling it has to be set up this way, but I think that there has to be a way around that and you still get the same effect without it being quite so confusing. And, it's not impossible. I think actually Lucan being dead now and then having a flashback starting from Lucan's perspective can help me because now I know, oh, right, this isn't, our Lucan is gone. So this has to be from a flashback. And that actually assists in like delineating a little bit more. But overall, I think that this is a very complicated story. You've already got it so complicated that you have 2 different characters having each got their own trilogy. That's a lot. And there really does come a point where when is too much too much? And I think we've reached it. At this point, I think too much is too much. And that's not to say I'm not enjoying it, but I just feel the story could have been better served with breaking it down a little bit more simply here. All that said, let's get into this moment with Esther 6 because she is basically, she's unconscious, but her soulbound vessels are losing their minds. And because of the fact that she is unconscious, they're not under any control of hers. And they're destroying the room. They're destroying the bed that she's on. Esther's skin was covered in rough scars and lumps of newly healed skin. Half her head was missing hair. The most powerful woman in the world was being twisted like a puppet at the mercy of her own powers. Which, that is so fucked up. The idea that this could happen. I feel like that's just not fair. It seems right, like that shouldn't be able to happen. I hate this for her. So Joran has created these chains, and he has given one to Shera, and they are meant to wrap around her. The chain twisted in the air as though the vessels had grabbed it and pulled it closer. When it drew close, the chain came to life and latched onto Esther, binding her arms to her body. The regent had torn her loose patient's gown to shreds, just like her bedding, but now she was mostly clothed by chains. The wind died down a little, and the skulls lost some of their intensity. Shera had been prepared for this. Needles flew from her hands. Most of them missed. Needles never flew well under the best circumstances, much less in a wind whipped up by a soulbound's wild powers. But a handful stuck to Esther's skin. They were the needles she usually carried as a gardener, but unlike the usual paralytic, they carried a custom solution Joran had ordered from the alchemists. Her eyelids fluttered. She dipped closer to the ground for a moment, but the Hydra skulls flew closer and she bobbed back up. Her vessels were fighting back. Like, truly. Vessels. Knock it off. Shit's bad. Help. Don't hurt. What are you doing? So Joran comes forward and he snaps some manacles around her wrists because it's been like weakened enough that he can actually get near her. And she drops like she was suspended from the ceiling and somebody just cut the rope she was tied to. And all the skulls drop and hit the floor. And Joran catches her. And now that the noise from the out-of-control Esther had quieted down, the door at the top of the stairs cracked open. A few consultants peeked in, ready to retreat at any sign of whirling missiles. They had contained Esther in a sub-basement beneath the library headquarters of the consultants. And Shera asked them to go and get bedding, and she is talking to Joran about what they can do with her vessels. She wants to take them away. And he's like, they're the only thing that's keeping her mind, like, connected at all. We can't do that. They're like a part of her. And she rightfully asks, okay, about her mind, though. Is it going to come back? Like, I know what you're saying, but we have to be realistic about the likelihood of her actually being able to regain herself. Her mind is not steering the ship. Our little Hydra friends have taken the wheel themselves. If we send them away, maybe Esther sets up as pilot, maybe nobody does, and the rudder goes lonely, and maybe someone else grabs at the empty wheel. And Shera is immediately like, wait, what? Can they do that? And immediately starts to be like, am I going to have to take Esther out? Like, is that the position that we're about to be in? And Joran straight up says, I don't know. I mean, maybe. There's not anything saying that they can't. I don't know that she's vulnerable enough with the strength she has, but he's just not sure. They're her flesh and bone as much as they ever belonged to Hydras. We separate them from her and we're breaking her shins and asking her to walk home. So when she's like, I don't know what we're going to do, though, if she creates like another earthquake, because apparently the way this woman has been out of control has been quite intense. It hasn't just been relegated to this room. And he says that the new blend of like alchemy that he used to calm her down will totally do the trick. But apparently that is what he said last time, and she broke through it anyway. So then he says, you know, she was reining herself back. And Shera is just like, I'll hear it from her when she wakes up. But he keeps talking. She could have spread everyone across the stones like hot butter in the snap of a finger. If she let herself off the leash, the champion couldn't have touched her. But then she and I would have been the only ones walking away. She held herself back for you. And we get the clarification that it's not Shera. It's just like all the mortal people. And Shera says, and what about you? Are you telling me that almost burning Calder Martin was the best you can do? And he doesn't respond, and Shera just leaves. And I found that kind of interesting because it didn't really occur to me. I know what he's saying about them holding back, and obviously they do need to do that. This is a similar thing as in Cradle, where if you've reached the stage of Monarch, there are battles that cannot be fought around regular people. It will kill them. And in those, it's not like weapons clashing exactly. It's the kinds of collateral damage that happen in these books. They still sometimes happen, but they're different. But the idea, because like she is thinking about what he's saying here as immortal self-pity. Essentially, if she hadn't restrained herself, she wouldn't be in this position right now. And it's not fair is kind of the vibe, that if she had done what she was actually capable of, then, so he's saying she sacrificed herself. And it's hard for me to like really feel sorry when people have the amount of ability these two do, that they have to hold back from just killing everybody around them. Like, yeah, I mean, I guess that's the fucking price you pay for being insanely powerful. So I'm not going to cry over it, you know? I get it. We need her, and she's very important. But also, I kind of see what Shera's saying with the self-pity thing. And her asking, couldn't you have done more to Calder than you did, and him not answering? That's, like, there is less said there about whether he was protecting people than just the fact that he didn't hit Calder as hard as he could have. Which feels like Shera is sort of holding him personally responsible. And I am not sure if there is supposed to be an accusation in there of some kind or what, but I just sort of thought it was interesting. So then Shera has to go to a meeting, and she is ready to fucking kill somebody at this point, by the way. She has had really, really bad flu-like symptoms from using this champion's elixir, I guess. And she kind of, when she was told it was going to be flu-like symptoms, didn't fully appreciate what that really meant. And anybody who's had the flu knows it is a miserable experience. And he really knows how to write somebody who is ill and tired, forcing themselves to do things and like being ready to cry practically that they're so tired. This was painful. So we have got this meeting with Barrius, and Furman is there, of course. Thomas Stillwell, head of the Green Wardens, the guy in the wheelchair with the vine. Jameson Albright, head of the Luminian Order. The Farstrider sisters, who are the ones who had the candle, I think, that were like recording what was happening. If I'm not mistaken, that's them. And then, I think, is that it? Yeah, I think that's it. And then Shera. So this is when Barrius, he just starts talking like out of the gate. A financial strike. Once the Farstriders publish their account of the peace meeting, all fairly and accurately, we'll have the standing to release our own interpretation. I own enough printing companies to paper every wall with news sheets between here and Axis. They wouldn't be happy with his bald declaration of intent to spin their account to political advantage, but they would allow it. That was the fate of the Guild of Witnesses. They would speak the unvarnished truth, and then someone else would come along and varnish it. And that has been highlighted by quite a few people, according to my Kindle. And I find that kind of funny. But if that isn't like, there is the way that reporting works today. There are very few sources that don't come with an inherent bias to them. And by inherent bias, I mean that are not owned by a major conglomerate that is protecting very specific interests. Our own bias does not mean that somebody tends towards being left-wing, and so they write from a left-wing perspective. It means, for me, they are straight up being told to lie because of who owns them, and they don't have a choice. And that is part of why the Marshall Project is so important. So if anybody is interested in finding some news that is like incredibly well researched and underfunded, Marshall Project is the one. So he says, in the capital alone, there are hundreds of companies still known for having major contracts. Many of them can't lose their imperial contracts, but they can't lose private business either. We can pressure private clients to back out. It will create all sorts of opportunities. And Stillwell is just like, dude, great. So happy for you. But I'm broke. My people aren't quite starving, but it's very close. Our Chimera need care that we can't give them anymore. And then Barrius starts saying, you need, what do you give us? What have you ever done for us? And I was just so, can somebody kill him? I absolutely hate this man so much. I just hate him. Really do. I just need him taken out. I'm right now, I'm just saying, like, the elders, yeah, they're a problem. Barrius is worse. Take him out. Get him out. Get him out. Okay. And then Albright says, that's not enough. We can't just be trying to play fucking economics with the great elders. What are you doing? We have got to handle this like it's the big picture that it is. And then he says we have to rile up the people, drive them as a righteous army into the imperial palace, and flush out the elder spawn while their forces are still weak. And he starts like yelling, and Shera's like, ooh, damn, because he seemed pretty chill a second ago, but I guess that's over. And she finally says, will you be all right on your own? And she starts to just get up and leave. And as she does, Barrius is like, where's the fire, girl? Where are you going? And Shera's like, the fire is that I'm going to murder every single one of you. I mean, if only we could just do that. I think Rashawn would really appreciate being able to just say that and leave a meeting. She goes out to Carrion and she says, assemble the gardeners. I'll be in my room. And she goes upstairs. Carrion lets her sleep for an hour. And when Shera wakes up, she's like, why do I feel worse? How did a nap make it worse? And that is the most relatable shit. I swear to God, this is part of why I don't nap. It is extremely rare for me to lay down for a nap and wake up and feel better. I almost always just feel groggy and incoherent and worse. So I don't do it. And especially when you're sick, I feel like there's maybe a rhythm your body starts to get into when it detects that you're asleep. And it's like, okay, we're really going to like start working on this virus now. We're really going to start like healing. It's going to be tough, but she's asleep and it'll be easier to do while she's asleep. And then you wake up and your body's like, we're in the middle of this. And you're just kind of ruining it, you know? It's like construction workers came in and just started to jackhammer up your kitchen floor. And then you try and walk in and make an omelet. And they're just, this isn't the time. You know? So anyway, Carrion says, so I hear you're going to kill all the imperialist leaders. And she's like, yeah, I'm pretty much about it. And then Carrion says, reminder, we don't have anybody like for our guilds that's sort of keeping us on track. If we just keep operating as we do, we belong to whoever can pay the most. And you know who that is. And then she suggests killing Barrius. And Carrion is like, yeah, and then who? Like, whoever takes his place is going to be like him. You know that. And she says, we need a new code of behavior. And the sooner we can begin operating by it, the better. And she lets Carrion, she's like, well, tell me. And Carrion tries to do the you're the mistress of the mist thing. But Shera's basically not interested. She's like, look, I'm trying to do this for now because we are in a bad situation. But we haven't had a mistress of the mist for fucking centuries. I don't think we need one. Once this is done and you don't need my power anymore, I'm not going to do this. And Carrion says, I think you can do better than that. Yala chose you. And she says, Yala had no idea it was going to happen. And Carrion says, no, she didn't know it would happen. But that wasn't like a well-known thing because it hadn't happened in centuries. She could have just been like, oh, cool, you sold out yourself to the Veil, that's convenient, and not told you what that really meant. And she did very publicly kneel in front of you and acknowledged what you are now, giving you control. That's pretty much her choosing you. She saw what a guild head like you could do for the consultants. You're a soulbound as powerful as the other guild heads, and a symbol that unites us in a single purpose in a way the council never could. We need singular vision now more than ever. And Shera is just like, all right, look, we're going to talk about this later, but I am literally the worst person for this job. Bring the kids in. We need to talk to them. So we have all the baby gardeners come in. The only one that's got actual shears is that dude, Ben, I think is his name. Is that his name? But he's the one who recognized her. And he, as she thinks later, probably has Lucan's shears. And she's kind of like freaked out a little bit for a moment at the idea that like somebody else is carrying his weapons. And yeah, like I forget that this stuff is basically, it belongs to the consultants and it's on loan. So he's not being buried with his stuff. They just get taken back to the fucking like inventory and then handed out again. And I can see how that would be really strange. So he is followed. I had said he was the only one with shears, but then come in a bunch of people with shears, and Carrion's like, oh, hey, yeah, I also appointed a bunch of new gardeners. Bye! And she just leaves and closes the door. And Ayana and Maya are both sort of like holding back smiles because Shera is just very irritable at the moment. She's looking around at how young they are, and it doesn't seem to really occur to her how young she had likely been. Let's see. Okay. It says only one of them carried a real pair of shears. The remaining attendees were the pseudo gardeners. So yeah, one of the pseudo gardeners has shears. She asks Ayana how they're doing. And Ayana's like, they're all right. Not great. And then Shera is like, listen up, everybody. And apparently she is idolized to the degree that everybody stands up straighter and is like at attention. And she says, we've been talking about how we are going to win this fight because peace talks fell through, as you may have heard, and I have mine. And there's only one reason why we can't have an emperor. It's the same reason why the real emperor let himself die. Because with one person on the throne, the great elders only need to take over one person to have the world. We're not fighting over the shape of our government. What do we know about government? We're fighting because Kellerak has his hooks in their emperor. And our worst case scenario for everyone is an elder wearing the crown. We're not letting Kellerak rule the world. The architects will be planning, looking for the best strategies, the most perfect tools. I'm not an architect. I'm a gardener. Here's what we're going to do. And then chapter 10, and we drop back 2 years. And it's Lucan talking to Yala. And this does not end with Lucan being tossed in his little cell, which is exactly how I thought it was going to go. And it surprised me quite a bit. He's coming to her straight up like, did you not want the Regents released? And that's why you wanted to kill the Emperor. And there's a real long moment the description of this goes quite a while. But summarizing, basically, she's trying to gauge exactly how much he knows. And he is trying to remind himself that he sort of has control in this situation, although it's clear he doesn't entirely feel like he does have control. And at first she tries to be like, I don't know, he didn't tell me what was, he doesn't tell me his plans. And Lucan is like, look, let's be real. I know the Regents are sleeping here. The Emperor told you that he was going to install them as his successors. And you wanted to move up the timetable so that they wouldn't be awakened. Is that it? And Yala's like, I don't know why I should fucking tell you that. And he says, I didn't hear the Emperor give that order, and I can't find a record of it. I imagine if such an order did exist, you would have a good reason for not following, and I'd like to know what the reason is. And finally, Yala says, yeah, yep, that's about it. And he's so wrong-footed by the fact that she just caved and is deciding to tell him everything. And he says, so why didn't you? And she pulls out this bag that she drops on the table, and it's very light. And she says, read this. And he begins to, let's see, I'm going to find the spot. Rather ride a fish into the great storms than sit on a throne. When the Emperor dies, so does the Empire. Sure as the grim dawn, the Empire will fall someday. But the people are too quick to equate imperial rule with humanity. So long as our scholarship progresses, technology... The remaining feel of intent in the scrap reminded him of one of the coffins down in Zen's basement. Joran Mazewalker, the Regent. So then there's this piece of wood. The wood was fragmented as Joran's burned piece of paper, having once belonged to the haft of an axe. He recognized this intent as well. This weapon will root out secrets, will defend against the Amharane, those who hide in the shadows like criminals and liars. Embedded with the sight of a chimera and the light of the sun, it will shine in the presence of hidden attackers, protecting those of good moral character against the skulkers in the dark. And then a candle wick, which had belonged to Alagaeus. This candle has the honor of illuminating the heir to the Empire, he who will rule when the Emperor is gone. The light will confuse the eyes of any guild member who tries to see in its presence, for the guilds are weak and untrustworthy. They must be kept in the dark, for they are not fit to hold power. And then this gray string. A small message, but it was enough. You will be a hood for the Mistress of the Mists. If they won't appoint a guild head, I'll do it myself, because I can't trust their counsel. And I'm very curious about all of this. I'm assuming the Regents don't trust them because of all the work that they did on behalf of the elders, which just makes fucking sense. And it's interesting that hadn't really occurred to Lucan. It hadn't occurred to me, but I'm also not researching this full time. And essentially he sits there and says, oh, and Yala's like, yeah, I knew what you were like investigating. I was keeping track of the books you took out and everything. We would have moved up the Emperor's timeline without his knowledge anyway, in service of him. So you acted with loyalty to the Emperor, to the Guild, and the Empire. And he feels out her intent, and it seems like she is being sincere here. The guilds can keep the empire together. There will be tough times ahead, but we'll weather them. And if our containment is not enough to hold the great elders, then we'll release the regents, not as our rulers, but in their intended function, as warriors who can stand against the likes of Cathanakar or Akhmagut. And he has this moment of just like, man, I really thought that it was just about the money with you. But if it's not, this complicates everything for me about the way that I see you. And he gets up and leaves with her. And then we go to chapter 11, which begins with a guild joke. Who trims the bushes on the Grey Island? No one. Gardeners don't exist. And this is when we get a series of scenes of different champions being taken out of the picture. And I really hate this, guys, because some of them just don't want they don't want to be part of the fight they are being accused of taking part in. For one of them, straight up saying, I have no interest in this, does seem to get her off the hook. I think. But the first one who gets taken out is very much about this fight. Taking him out, that feels reasonable. And it starts with him, and you're like, okay, yeah, I see why. And then it just gets progressively, like, sadder, you know? So the first dude is Darovish, Interion Darovish. And he is essentially like, I am going to find these motherfuckers, and I am going to take them down. The snakes of the independent guilds had killed Kern, which I don't think it even registered with me that he was dead. But apparently, and I just like, everything was so chaotic that I missed it somehow. And let's see, the massive tower for which the town had been named loomed over him, the gem at its top blazing like a white sun. And he is in this like carriage, and there's a moment where it seems like they're going to be stopped in a kind of routine moment of like, hey, we need to search. And he hears them talking to the driver, who tells them, oh, there's a champion inside, and is smiling to himself because he hears the guy sort of gulping in fear, and he realizes that his reputation is helping to defend him here. And then, after a moment, there's no sound. The carriage shudders, but it doesn't move forward. And he leans his body out and looks around, and the horses are gone, and the carriage is just propped up. And he thinks he's just been straight up robbed. He placed one foot on the step before the alchemical munitions detonated. The explosion scorched him in an instant, sending his flame-ravaged body tumbling down into a ditch. He had no idea how far he had been thrown, but the pain was all-consuming. And he hears footsteps and is like, oh, good, somebody can save him. And then they slit his throat. And I really, really liked this moment of just him being like, I'm superior to all others because of my power and my strength. And he just clearly underestimated the value of planning ahead and knowing who you're dealing with probably as well. So George says this chapter is such a fun vignette of morality. It's like, yeah, okay, murder is an okay answer here. What about here? Okay, now how about this? Yeah, that's kind of like the deal with a lot of these books specifically, is just the cycle of everybody trying to kill everybody. And there are people that you feel like it's more fair. And then you'll get one tiny extra piece of information, and all of a sudden it shifts everything. And you're like, oh, well, this is super unfair, actually. The context is completely changes everything. So then we have this woman, Oleana, who is basically torturing everybody who had been involved with trapping her alchemically. The members of his guild who had poisoned her, gassed her, and tied her down with glue had laughed at her. They'd mocked her, saying that a real champion would snap her bonds. It had taken her lungs weeks to heal from what they'd done to her. And she's just like, send me another one. And there's a servant who's like, we're almost out. And she's like, there's always more. Get me a fucking another one. And this description. Oleana liked to start by making it a battle. She gave them their choice of weapon while she went in barehanded. When they realized they couldn't kill her with a spear or a sword, even if she stood there and did nothing, they started to plead. That was when she batted them around like a ball for as long as they lasted, which usually wasn't very long. And there is something about letting them try that, I don't know, I just kind of love it. Like, it's fucked up, but that's sort of what I enjoy about it. So she goes down to the docks. She's getting some drinks. She has to drink a lot because she's a champion and her metabolism is insane. So, and it says the server never left her side, and he was adorable with huge brown eyes and a quick laugh anytime she said anything remotely funny. He grew more adorable with every drink. And I really enjoy this being a dude who seduces a woman, because you guys know it's almost always a man who is being seduced by some hot spy chick. So I really do enjoy it being the shoe on the other foot here. And they're going up the stairs, he's protesting, saying he needs to go back to work, but she just shoves him through the door and is like, don't be nervous. And I was just like, ew, girl. And this is when he throws a dart at her, and she starts laughing and is like, you got to do better than that. And then 4 other ones prick her, and she starts to spin and fight back. She's got this mirror that she's going to use as a weapon. And all of a sudden, she can't lift the mirror anymore. Her body felt like it was turning to stone. She fell to her hands and knees, the mirror cracking against the floor beside her. And she tries to, like, say something, and her throat apparently has also completely seized up. We don't actually get the slit her throat moment, but they pulled their knives, so we know what's going on. Then we have Trip, and this is the one that really hurt. Trip is a champion, but he's trying to fucking mainstream. He is just wanting to, like, do his construction job and then go home and have a life. And he's thinking how wild it is that, like, everything he is able to do as a champion makes him ideal for a job like this. And it's kind of wild that they don't make more champions for just brute strength type grunt work. And he's really feeling like a bit of kinship with the guys he works with, who all seem to really like him. And it's just, you know, it just felt like he almost has a life, a real life. He had a date with Deanne, a girl from the Black Watch, waiting in a tea house near the palace gates. During the meal, a group of his friends from the Imperial Guard spotted him. They insisted on paying the bill for the both of them. Trip had saved their lives after the battle, pulling them one by one from the burning wreckage. No one had ever appreciated him so much, to the point that he almost suspected a trick. For the first time, he felt like a hero. You guys, I hate this so much. So he's got his hand on the doorknob, heading home, and an Imperial Guard steps out of the shadows. And she says, "Why are you fighting with us?" And he says, "We're the Aurelian Empire. Isn't it the same for you?" And she just grunts and walks away. This is clearly Ayana. I love the fact that even though she's creepy, he isn't creeped out exactly, because, like, why would he? He can deal with anything, right? She grunted and walked away, but he didn't take it personally. Since the battle, there had been many like her. Doubt was an insidious enemy. He walked in and greeted his host family, played with their children for a while, and then headed off to sleep. Tripp never woke up. The family discovered his body the next morning, not bearing a single apparent injury. It looked as though he had passed peacefully in his sleep. And I like to imagine that they gave him a really merciful death because he didn't seem like he was as aggro as the others did. You know, there was one guy who was just seething with hatred, and then there was a woman who was actively torturing people. And then there's this guy who's just like, it's just kind of my job, man. And they're like, all right, we do get it. You have to die, but we're not going to make it too hard for you. I don't know if that's it. I'm assuming he was poisoned by the Black Watch, but the Black Watch is against the consultant, so I don't know. That doesn't make sense. I don't know how this is meant to... Maybe it's his hand on the doorknob? Maybe there was something on the doorknob, but then that could have hurt everybody in the house. I don't know how they did it. And then Izara is the one who seems to sort of get away. And let's see. She's loading up a ship, and she's about to basically go and travel all over these places. And she's thinking about her injuries, which still haven't recovered, and lifting things. She has to be careful. She has a blindfold over her eyes because apparently something had been done that, like, makes her very sensitive to light. And she is thinking about how eager she is to put all this behind her and not deal with it anymore. And this girl pops up and is like, hey, where are you going? And she says, back home to Aziria. And the girl says, Axis? And she says, no, never seen it. My town is Yala. And the girl's like, oh, you're not going to stay and, like, fight Esther? And Isara's like, nah, I'm good. I do not want any more of that. And the girl's like, oh, all right, well, have a good trip. And she just jumps down off the barrel and leaves. So the fact that she was not interested got her off the hook. Okay, damn. I felt for her. I really wish Tripp had just left. Tripp, you were so close. You were so close, man. So then we have chapter 12, and this is just basically almost all a conversation between Lucan and Shera, where he is explaining to her the situation with the regents being asleep and the deal with, like, killing the emperor early and why all of this happened the way that it did. And let's see. He says at least two of them don't want to rule, because she's like, well, they could just take over whenever. And he's like, they don't seem to want that. Alligaeus does, I guess, and Esther kind of does, but Esther is much more about, like, fighting the elders even than that. The biggest threat is they'll appoint their own emperor candidate rather than allowing the guilds to do it. And she's like, well, the guilds don't seem interested in doing it anyway. They haven't done it so far. And he's like, yeah, but they've all issued, like, statements. And it feels like we're getting to a point where they're about to begin to move. And she finally just says, okay, so how do we open it? And he has to say, I agree with Yala that we shouldn't. And she's like, wait, what? Why? And he says, the regents are kind of like, their reps are a little questionable, especially Alligaeus, which we all can be thankful he's the only one of them that was successfully killed, I think. And she says, the emperor left his death to us and trusted us to deal with it. This is our job. And he says, Shera, if we could just abandon the guild, would you do it? Just you and me? And she's immediately like, do you think that the kitchens are open? Because we can go and get some stuff right now. I know where they keep it. And he has to be like, see, here's the thing. I know that you wouldn't betray me and, like, Maya, but you don't feel like you have a lot of loyalty to the guild specifically. So wanting to just do your job because is kind of surprising to me. Maybe you should trust me about the fact that you should have more loyalty. And for a long time, she thinks about it. And I like the fact that he can tell by her expression, she's not just going to say no on like reflex. She's genuinely sort of considering. And then she says, no, I think this is where you should trust me. Your loyalty to the guild gets in your way, so you can't see the truth. It's simple. And he starts to be like, it's not simple. And she says, do you trust Yala more or the Emperor? And this is basically what they had talked about already, but with more information built into it. And he says, you're trying to decide who rules the world right now. How are you going to be mad at them for trying to? And she says, there's no decision to make. The Emperor already made it. They will ruin us, Lucan said. What if they start fighting among themselves for rule? What if they shut down the Consultant's Guild? Jordan built the island. What if he claims it for his own? And she says, do you trust Yala and the High Council to make better decisions about the fate of the world than the Emperor? And he starts to say, that's not. And she says, do you think you know better than he did? And finally, he just says no. And she's like, well, voila. How do we open the coffins? And he sits there trying to argue and has to admit, when it comes down to it, it is just about who he trusts more and who probably is working with like the best information and who actually cares about the Empire itself over the like profit to be made. And it's really interesting because they're coming to the exact opposite conclusion of Calder, who has had his own like dealings with the Emperor, where he's just, this guy doesn't actually care in a real way about the people. And so we need to be done like having him as our boss because actually he's toxic and bad. And I love how this is written because you can just completely and 100% understand the perspectives of each of them being what they are. They're working with very specific knowledge and information, and they both are drawing conclusions that feel like the logical conclusion to draw. In both cases, I'm kind of like, no, I get it. Yeah, I'd probably think the exact same thing in your position. And he's like, he knew all of these regents personally. Lucan could try and tell himself it was the heart of Nikothi speaking through the Emperor, but he had no reason to think so. In the end, he just didn't want to see his guild fall. And he finally says, what do you care about the Empire? And she says, haven't I served the Empire all this time? He had to force his jaw closed. Yes, he admitted to himself. She really had. And that is the end of chapter 12. Sorry, about to say 13. So, I guess shit is about to heat up. I don't know what to do because, like, the Regents, I can understand feeling like they're the right way to go, but I just don't really know how a lot of this stuff works. So, and by works, I mean, like, the setting up of a new government, having to redo it all, it just sounds so overwhelming. I'm just glad I don't have their job, is what I'm saying. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. It's really wild because I'm looking at like the rest of the schedule, and at first it just looked like Of Killers and Kings has 15 more episodes to go. And then I realized, oh no, that's just because Kings and Killers looks like the same title. And so I'm putting them both together. Asher says, can you give a chapter breakdown for next week? There's a lot going on and I have to reread. Okay, I'll look into it. I don't have it on this, for some reason, Kindle on my desktop does not show page numbers. So I will have to check. Next time I should actually add that to the intake forms for commissions that like ask which chapters, because I think that would help with the potential, I've been nervous about that with this actually, because I didn't do a breakdown ahead of time, that I'm going to wind up like needing an extra episode. So I probably should just like sit down and make sure that it all balances out properly. Because that's what happened with commissioning the last Cradle book, was we broke it down according to pages, but then it turned out the chapter endings didn't quite line up and he had to commission an extra episode, or else I was going to have to sort of rush. So probably I need to just begin to do a chapter breakdown at the point of commission so that we all are on the same page. But yeah, I will, and I will put it in, I'll put it in the Spoil Me Planning channel on Discord. And I'll tag you, Asher. So, all right, everybody. Well, I will see you soon with a new episode. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.